So good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the General Optical Council evening webinar, where we are introducing to you continuing professional development, our new CPD scheme that starts from the 1st of January 2022. So thank you all very much indeed for joining us this evening. We have about an hour ahead of us. Whether you are listening live or accessing the recording online at a future date, welcome and thank you very much for joining us. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to introduce the panel, and then I'm going to go through the agenda for this afternoon's discussion. So my name is Leonie Milliner, and I'm the Director of Education here at the General Optical Council. And I'm going to ask my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. So if I could ask Natalie to introduce yourself, please, Natalie.
Absolutely. Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Natalie Michaud. I'm the Standards Manager and the CPD Review Project Lead here at the General Optical Council.
Thank you ever so much, Natalie. Joanne, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, of course, Leonie. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Joanne Abbott, and I am the CPD Project Manager here at the GOC.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And we all know Joy. Joy, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
For that, Leonie. Yeah, my name is Joy Bolt. I am CET manager, currently the CPD manager as of this year.
Thank you very much, Joy. And I just want to mention our behind the scenes crew who are running the technical aspects of this evening's webinar, and a particular thanks to Vikram from our communications department. I'm not going to ask Vikram to introduce himself, but I do want to acknowledge the hard work that's been going on behind the scenes. So what do we have ahead of us this evening? Well, we have a good 3/4 of an hour of presentations and animations for you. We're going to start off with a brief introduction in describing the reasons why we're moving from CET to CPD. And Natalie's going to lead us through that session. We're going to move on through an animation and then have a quick preview of the new MyCPD platform that will be launching in the new year. That will take us up until about 5:30 this afternoon. And then we will move on, and Joy will give us an update around peer review and summarise some of the key points there for your information. We'll then move on to a short presentation from Natalie and Joanne around self-directed CPD. What is it and what are the benefits? Before we go on to demystify reflective practice, and that session will be led by Joanne. Hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes left at the end of this session when you can submit questions to us using the live question and answer button that you'll find on your webinar here. And we will be answering some of your pre-submitted questions and providing you with some answers that we hope will be useful. This is very much the first of a series of CPD webinars introducing you to the new CPD cycle that commences in the new year. The next seminar will be in February. We'll be looking very much at the nuts and bolts of the new website. So I think we have one more slide, if you wouldn't mind moving on, Vikram, just a few notes. Thank you very much indeed. So please do pop your questions in the question and answer session. What we will do is we will provide a response to all of your questions and circulate those by email after today's session, and we'll share also the answers on our website. You will be able to log on and watch this webinar in the future from our website. So do look out for that. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Natalie, who's going to talk us through about why making the change, reasons for moving from CET to CPD. Thank you ever so much, Natalie.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that introduction, Leonie. So good evening, everybody. I just wanted to talk through the main reasons why we're making the change from CET to CPD, to give a bit of context to the decisions that we've made, and so that you can understand why we've implemented the requirements that we've implemented. If there are any questions, as Leonie said before, that pop up throughout, do please put those in the question and answer box. We may not be able to answer them today live, but we will get back to you, as Leonie said, via email, and we'll upload the answers to our website so you've all got the benefit of seeing them. Vikram, next slide, please. So just to talk a bit about CET, so Continuing Education and Training, the scheme that's in place at the moment. It's not so much that there's anything particularly wrong with CET, and certainly it was very groundbreaking when we first introduced it, simply because we were one of the first regulators to introduce an element of revalidation into continuing professional education. And what we mean by revalidation is maintenance of existing skills to avoid losing them. So those core clinical skills that are fundamental to a registrant's practice, making sure that those skills are maintained for the benefit of patients. The real issue with CET is that the sector has changed a lot since CET was introduced. Revalidation is still important, and it's still important that you as registrants keep up those core skills, but the optical profession needs a bit more than that, and patients need a bit more than that. So next slide, please. When we were considering making change, it was as a result of three main triggers. The first being responding to feedback, and that's feedback that we received from registrants themselves, as well as from educationalists, from CET providers, and from members of the public. Another trigger for change was the need to prepare for the future. What's happening in the sector, what's happening in this country, what's happening in society, and the healthcare needs of the patient base that our registrants serve. The final trigger was aligning with other professions and making sure that what we did made sense in light of what other healthcare professions do with whom we work. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this slide, some of the feedback that we received, particularly from registrants, was that CET is not relevant to their scopes of practice. So a lot of registrants had fed back to us that, particularly if they were in niche roles or roles that didn't involve a majority of high street practice, that CET didn't really meet their needs and didn't allow them to account for the types of learning that they would want to undertake in order to improve the service that they provide. As such, some people said it was a bit of a box ticking exercise. They felt like they had to check off certain requirements rather than undertaking learning for the sake of learning and to learn new skills. Others told us that the requirements under CET were too comfortable, not challenging enough, because they were simply revalidating their existing skills rather than being encouraged to develop new ones. And these sentiments were echoed not just by registrants themselves, but also by other stakeholders. So we had it coming from all angles, and it was a real impetus for change. Next slide, please, Vikram. So preparing for the future, again, another trigger for change. What's changing? Well, scopes of practice are changing of registrants. As we know, more and more registrants are working in diverse areas of healthcare practice. So whilst perhaps the model 10, 20 years ago, even as recently as 5 years ago, many more registrants were working in what we would call traditional roles, so high street practice. That's not happening so much anymore. The pandemic especially has accelerated the speed of change in terms of scopes of practice, but more and more registrants are working, for example, in academia, in policy roles, alongside other medical professionals, that kind of thing. So scopes of practice are really changing and diversifying, and registrants are specialising a lot more as well. Even those who don't hold specialty registration, there are a lot more registrants focusing on, for example, the needs of paediatric patients or the needs of patients with learning disabilities, and really specialising in those areas to provide the service that those patients need. Another way in which things are changing are more flexible care models. So again, care is not necessarily being provided to patients solely by way of high street practice anymore. There are integrated clinics with hospitals there are all kinds of models of care that are being contemplated out there at the moment. Practitioners are thinking about whether they can provide services safely and legally online. Lots of different models of care are springing up, and we need to make sure that the professions are fully equipped to be able to serve the public in those models of care. Patient needs are evolving as well. We know that we have an aging population in the UK who have very different eye care needs to other sectors and other stratas of the population. We also know that the second biggest tranche of society are the young people, so 18 to 25-year-olds behind the elderly. Their needs are very different to those of the aging population, but they're still ones that need to be recognised and accommodated by the sector. Another preparation for the future element is in relation to what's happening in wider healthcare, or what's happened in wider healthcare. So many of you will be aware of various healthcare scandals and subsequent inquiries that have happened over the course of the last few years. These inquiries set out recommendations for healthcare professionals, but for regulators too, on what action they might take to avoid repetition of similar scandals in the future. And we had to take those recommendations into account when we were thinking about what do our registrants need to learn, what do we need to equip them with the skills to manage going forward. Vikram, next slide, please. So finally, aligning with other professions. So other professions across healthcare use the term CPD to refer to kind of professional learning, postgraduate learning. So it's good for us to be aligned with the other healthcare professionals, particularly as we have greater cross-professional working and hybrid business models, increased working, particularly of optometrists with ophthalmologists in hospitals and other care settings. And it's CPD gives us an element of the initial revalidation, but also it encourages and kind of sets out what it means to be a professional, developing new skills and professional interests alongside that revalidation. So to be fully aligned with other healthcare professionals, that's another reason that we introduced CPD. That was just a quick rundown of some of the rationale why we've made the changes that we have. The next element of this webinar is going to be an animation which goes through, in summary, what the main changes are and what you need to expect.
CET will become CPD from the 1st of January 2022. CPD stands for Continuing Professional Development and is designed to help you build upon your existing skills and develop new ones. Here are the main things that you need to know about CPD. CPD will run in 3-year cycles, and you will need to obtain the same number of points as you did under CET. So 36 points for optometrists, dispensing opticians, and those with contact lens specialty, and 54 points for specialty prescribing optometrists. You will obtain your points across 4 core domains: professionalism, communication, clinical skills, and leadership and accountability. If you hold specialty registration, you will also need to get points from a 5th specialty domain. You can now count relevant learning from other sources towards your CPD points total. All registrants will need to undertake 1 peer review per cycle, including dispensing opticians. All registrants will also need to complete a reflective exercise once per cycle, looking back at their learning and development throughout that cycle. You will be responsible for logging details of your CPD on your MyCPD account. Doing this is simple, and you can look up details of CPD you attended to make it even easier. More information about CPD and what you'll need to do to meet our requirements is in our guide for registrants, which you can find on our website.
Thank you, Vikram, for playing that. So the next section of the webinar, we're going to take a sneak peek at the new MyCPD platform developed for us by Perceptive, who we're contracting with to undertake this work. And we've got some screenshots to show you to give you an idea of how it's going to look when you log in for the first time in January, hopefully 2022. Vikram, next slide, please. So the initial screen that you will see when you log into MyCPD, as you'll be able to see from this screen, it should look very familiar to you all. We've tried to keep the look and feel of it as similar to MyCET as possible. And I should state at this point that to be able to access MyCPD, you don't need to re-register, you don't need to create a new account or anything like that. Access it through MyGOC as you always would have done. So nothing changes in that regard. When you first log in at the start of the cycle, you'll get information on the screen about the main points to note about CPD as a recap, and you will also be asked to fill out a scope of practice questionnaire and complete your personal development plan. Your personal development plan is even more important than it usually is. So not because it's valuable to plan your learning, though of course it is, but also because the personal development plan will provide the foundation for your reflective exercise, and more on that a bit later. Vikram, next slide, please. So once you've completed your scope of practice questionnaire and personal development plan, and I should say you won't be able to progress any further through the system until you've answered those questions and completed that, this is what your dashboard will look like. So again, should look familiar to most of you. We've got sections for planning and looking back at your personal development plan, adding to it, editing various bits if your scope of practice changes, for example, or if you want to add any additional kind of learning goals or anything like that in there. There's also a section for recording your CPD. So this is, as was mentioned in the animation previously, this is a big change for registrants. No longer will providers upload points for you to accept, but it will be your responsibility as a registrant to log details of the CPD you undertake. So providers will give you that information when you book the CPD or when you attend and receive confirmation of attendance of the CPD, but you will need to log the details. Providers are aware of this and are fully equipped to provide you with all that information. There's a Reflect tab as well, as you can see. So your reflective exercise, the substantive reflective exercise that you're required to undertake as part of the CPD cycle, you'll be able to submit that from the 1st of July 2024. So whilst that's not coming for a while yet, it's good to think about what you're going to put in your personal development plan, because that will form the foundations of the reflective exercise. There's also a search tab. So you can search for CPD to undertake. You may search by particular location if you're wanting face-to-face CPD, by provider if you've attended CPD by them that you've particularly enjoyed previously, by individual domain. So if you've got a particular domain to fulfill and you need points in that area, you could search by that domain. And you can also search by format. So if you've a preference for webinars, for example, or face-to-face sessions, you can look for CPD in that area too. Next slide, please. So this slide shows what your CPD statement will look like. Again, as with previous screens, you should recognize a very similar look and feel. You will see where you are in the CPD cycle from this screen. And there's also the reminder at the top that you are responsible for adding and logging your own CPD points. Next slide, please. So the other half of your statement, or the part of your statement, sets out how many points you still need to get and your progress against the overall CPD requirements. So for those of you who might be unfamiliar, this environment is tailored to your specific CPD requirements, because not every registrant has the same requirements depending on their registration category. So these dials here show you your progress against individual requirements. So as you can see, this particular registrant has completed 11 CPD points. They're points requirement total is 36, so they've not quite gotten there yet. Provider-led CPD points. So when we talk about provider-led CPD, and a bit more about this later, provider-led is CPD that is delivered by providers that are registered with the GOC. And there is another type of CPD, again, which we'll talk about a bit later. This registrant has completed 4 provider-led CPD points. So again, needs to complete a minimum of 18 in that regard. The registrant is more than halfway there to completing their interactive requirements, has completed all of the core domains, has completed their peer review, which is mandatory for all registrants from now on, or from January 2022 onwards. And there's the dial showing how many points they've completed this year. And as many of you will be aware, we recommend that registrants complete at least 6 points per year. Next slide, please. So this screen shows where you add points, add CPD points to your statement. And you should be adding all the CPD that you undertake to your statement, unless you don't particularly want to claim any points for it. But we would encourage you to log all the CPD that you undertake on your statement, because it's really important to reflect on that learning and think about the value that it added to your professional development. So you'll see the 2 different buttons, one showing adding points from provider-led CPD, the first type of CPD, and adding points from self-directed CPD. We'll talk more about self-directed CPD later on, but next slide, please, for now. So here you can see the screen for adding provider-led CPD points. You can look up details of your CPD, the CPD that you've undertaken, to import those details straight into your account, which should make it easier and simpler for you to be able to log those points quickly. So as you can see from the screen, you can search by CPD reference, title, location, or date. You can, if you've got all those details manually with you, just pop in one of them into one of the search boxes, and the search will find that CPD for you, and you'll just need to verify that before it's added to your statement. Next slide, please. Adding self-directed CPD points, we do require a bit more information from you here, partly because we can't look up details of that CPD because it's not CPD that's delivered by persons or organisations that are registered with us. So as you can see from this screen, we do require a bit of additional information input manually by you. The CPD title, the completion date, we'll ask for the format and more details about who delivered it, when it was delivered, what it contained, and what you learned from it. And you will need to complete a short reflection statement to talk about what you gained from the CPD and why it was relevant to your practice. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Joy Bolt, who is going to talk about peer review requirements under the new scheme.
Hello, my name is Joy Bolt and I'm the CET manager. Today, I would like to explain to you the changes in how to meet your points requirements, especially in terms of peer review in the new CPD scheme. Currently, registrants can obtain peer review points by attending either a provider-led peer discussion or a registrant-led peer review. However, both types of events must have received approval by the GOC before they can be delivered to registrants. The approval would have been sought by either the CET provider or the individual registrant organising the event. After the event had taken place, the provider or organising registrant would upload the point to the attendees, and the CET platform would automatically tick off the peer review requirement once the points have been accepted. In the new CPD scheme, events will no longer need to be approved in advance, and they no longer need to be delivered by providers. As registrants, you can organise and run your own peer review groups and upload the points to your account yourself. This will allow greater flexibility and will enable you to take advantage of last-minute meetings or invitations without the need to organise pre-approval. Each attendee will be responsible for uploading the information about the peer review into their own account, as points will no longer be awarded directly. This means you will need to have a record of the discussion's theme or topic and the relevant domains and learning outcomes covered. You should also keep a note of the discussions taking place during the event, as you will need to provide documentation for each point you claim should your account be selected for audit. However, you must ensure no confidential or identifiable patient information is shared, either in the discussion or in your notes. You will, of course, still need to complete a reflection statement. For those registrants who would prefer not to lead their own event, as in the current CET scheme, you will also have the option to attend a provider-led review. However, you will still need to upload your points against the event listed by the provider and to upload your certificate of attendance as your evidence in case of audit. This will no longer be done by the provider. For this CPD scheme, dispensing opticians will now be required to complete at least one peer review per cycle. Registrants looking for general peer review points can attend events made up of optometrists and dispensing opticians, as both groups are considered peers. However, those registrants on the specialty registers will need to complete a peer review with fellow specialty registrants for it to be counted towards their peer review requirement. I hope this has been helpful in clarifying the new requirements, but if you need any further assistance, please do feel free to contact the CPD department at cpd@optical.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Joy. So now we're going to talk a bit more about self-directed CPD, as I referred to earlier. We're going to go through what it is, and what are the benefits of it, and some examples of it too. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned briefly previously, there are two types of CPD. The first being provider-led CPD, which describes learning delivered by a provider who is registered with the GOC, and self-directed CPD, which describes any other learning that is relevant to your professional practice. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of self-directed CPD, and why have we introduced it? Well, we wanted to allow our registrants to account for all the professional development they undertake, whether that's via a GOC registered provider or otherwise. We know our registrants undertake a lot of learning outside of those sources, and we wanted that to be accounted for and recognised. We also wanted to recognise that valuable learning can come from sources outside the immediate optical sector. We know that a lot of our registrants, for example, work in management roles, whether that be practice management or higher up in various kind of businesses and corporations. We wanted to recognise that they can benefit from learning outside the optical sector to do their jobs well. We also wanted to encourage registrants to undertake wider learning than just in optics, and to promote greater reflection across the board, to think about what we're learning and why we're learning it. Next slide, please. So what counts as self-directed CPD? We're going to talk a bit more in detail about this in the next couple of slides. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Joanne to talk about that. But self-directed CPD is really anything that's relevant to your professional practice or career development. All we ask is that you can justify why you've done it and how it will help you in practice. So an online course in information security, for example, might be appropriate, but your grade 8 piano will not be. It needs to be immediately relatable back to your professional practice. How are you going to use it? Why are you going to use it? That's what we're interested in. Next slide, please. So how many points is self-directed CPD worth? Well, because we can't verify the quality of it independently, we can't provide the level of quality assurance that we can with provider-led CPD, self-directed CPD is only eligible for 1 point, regardless of duration or complexity. So that's not 1 point for all of the self-directed activities you undertake, I should say, 1 point per self-directed activity. The one exception to this is registrant-led peer review. So registrant-led peer review, we would expect you to log as self-directed CPD, and that counts for 3 points. Next slide, please. So my colleague Joanne is going to talk to you a bit more about the different formats of self-directed CPD and give some examples of what might be included in those formats. Joanne.
Thank you, Natalie. So for self-directed CPD formats, as you can see, there are 6 different formats available. When you upload your self-directed CPD to your My CPD record, you'll need to state which format it falls under. The formats for self-directed CPD are somewhat different to those that you've previously known in provider-led CPD or CET, but they recognise that you can complete CPD in a wider range of modalities. The GOC is unable to give specific advice to you on the formats of the CPD that you undertake. That is your own decision to make. So this guidance is just intended to help you make that decision. Next slide, please. So registrant-led peer review is our first format. I know that both Natalie and Joy have covered this to some part in tonight's discussion so far, but just to recap here, peer review is a CPD requirement for all registrants, and you may undertake either provider-led or registrant peer review. This format of CPD is interactive and is a discussion of practice-based scenarios and cases. Participants may bring their own anonymised cases, or you can discuss prepared scenarios. Optometrists and dispensing opticians now count as peers, but for specialty registrants, you're required to complete a peer review with peers with the same speciality. And for this, you will need to discuss content relevant to your own specialty domain. Next slide, Vikram, please. The next format is formal learning. In formal learning, you will be aware of the topic or theme and expected learning outcomes beforehand, and it's usually completed with other professionals. This may be optical registrants or allied healthcare professionals, usually interactive, where you have the opportunity to interact with others and pose questions. And the format examples include lectures, seminars, webinars, discussion workshops, skills workshops, and visual recognition tests. So a lot of these formats will be quite familiar to you already. Next slide, please. The next format is distance learning. For distance learning, this is primarily where you're working on your own using a range of learning materials or media. And this may include formal feedback, or you may be required to complete a self-assessment of your learning. Formats of this type include text-based distance learning articles, self-led research. This may be as a response to an incident or an experience in practice, and distance learning with tutor feedback. Next slide, please, Vikram. So the next format is work-based learning, and this is going to be quite new to a lot of our registrants. This is CPD that is led by experiences in your workplace. It's usually completed with other professionals and usually interactive. So the format examples here would be work shadowing, coaching colleagues, practice-based discussion with peers, or case-based reflective practice. Next slide, please. Our next format is academic learning. The focus of academic learning may be clinically based, or it may be in response to a business need, such as undertaking leadership or management courses or qualifications. Next slide, please. Another format that will be quite new to a lot of us is the professional activities format. Formats including authoring CPD, student examining or supervising, mentoring, lecturing, volunteering within the optical sector or the wider healthcare professions, profession or eye health promotion, such as presentations to a public group, at a school, or representation at a careers fair. Next slide, please. And back to you, Natalie.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Joanne. I hope that was really helpful to a lot of you to give you some ideas of what might count as self-directed CPD, but just to give you a bit more information on the requirements when you're logging that. So you must complete a short reflection statement for all self-directed CPD, including registrant-led peer review. So we're not expecting pages and pages, but we do expect a short statement setting out what the CPD was about, why you completed it, what you learned, and how you feel it will benefit you in practice. Or perhaps after undertaking the learning, you feel like it won't actually benefit you in practice. That's an acceptable reflection too. Next slide, please. So to talk more about reflection more generally, we've got a short video from Joanne who's talking more about reflection as a concept, as well as the reflective exercise in the main that we'll ask you to complete towards the end of a CPD cycle.
Hello, my name is Joanne Abbott and I am the CPD project manager here at the GOC. Reflection is a key element of continuing professional development. As part of your CPD requirement, you're expected to reflect on the learning that you undertake. There are two different reflections that you are required to complete. These are firstly a reflective exercise to be completed towards the end of the 3-year CPD cycle, and secondly a reflective statement that you're encouraged to complete for every piece of CPD. The reflective exercise is to be completed with peer in the last 6 months of the CPD cycle. You're encouraged to identify who you will complete this exercise with in good time ahead of undertaking the exercise. You should complete the exercise when you have completed or are near to completing your CPD requirements. Reflection exercise template will be available to download from the GOC website. Further details of the reflective exercise can be found in our CPD guide for registrants. It is compulsory for you to complete a reflection statement for every peer review and self-directed CPD that you complete, although you are encouraged to undertake reflection for all CPD. Reflective practice can seem quite daunting, but in reality, we undertake some form of reflection informally every day without consciously thinking about it. Everyday reflections could be as complex as thinking about whether we made the right clinical judgment in onward referral of a patient, or as simple as deciding whether we need to order more stock of spectacle frames. Many describe reflection as a continuous learning cycle, but reflective practice should be viewed as a learning spiral where new knowledge builds upon previous experiences and ultimately shapes and changes the way we approach our professional practice. There are many different ways to reflect on your learning. The GOC provide a reflection statement template, but you are free to choose an alternative method or framework if that better suits your needs. The GOC reflection statement guides your reflection by considering reflection on action and reflection for action. It employs an adaptation of the Driscoll model of reflection, which is widely used among healthcare practitioners. The model considers 3 elements. The first is what. What was the action, event, or learning? The next is so what. And this is an explanation of why the action, event, or learning was significant. And the third element is now what, a consideration of how you'll use the information to inform your future practice, or whether the learning has highlighted any areas requiring further development for you or your peers or colleagues. Reflective practice enables us to openly look at and challenge our knowledge and assumptions, and offers an opportunity to increase our self-awareness. Reflection can be of both positive and negative actions, events, or learning. It may feel uncomfortable at times to critically examine the CPD that you complete, but through critical reflection, we are able to positively change our practices, impact the practices of others, and benefit our patients.
Thank you,
Thank
Joanne.
you. Thank you. You beat me to it, Natalie. Thank you ever so much, Joanne, and thank you to all of our presenters this evening. It's been absolutely fascinating set of presentations, animations, and videos. So thank you very much. So prior to this evening's webinar, we did receive some pre-submitted questions, which we're going to answer. But please do keep your questions coming in to the Q&A button on the webinar if you're listening in live, of course, and we will respond to all of your questions and circulate those responses by email and publish on our website. So I think we have about 8 questions and about 20 minutes. The panelists this evening are going to do their best to answer the questions in turn. So I'm going to read out question number 1, which is, how many points do I need to get in each of the 4 domains? This is a really good opening question. And to lead us through the answer, I'm going to ask Joy. Joy, how many points should a registrant get in each of the 4 core domains?
Thank you, Leonie. Yes, you will need to get at least 1 point in each of the core domains. How you actually spread the rest of your points is entirely up to you, but that would depend on your scope of practice. But we would actually encourage you to, well, for most registrants, to aim to spread them out relatively evenly over all 4 of them throughout the course of the cycle.
Great, thank you ever so much, Joy. So hopefully that provides some much needed clarity on that particular area. So if we move on to our second question, please. Thank you. So the second question is, how will I know how many CPD points to log if the provider is not uploading them for me to accept? So this is one of the key changes in the transition from CET to CPD. And Joanne, are you able to answer this question?
Hi, Leonie. Yes, I'm able to answer that question. Thank you. The answer is that the provider should be letting you know how many points a piece of CPD rather is worth when you register to attend it, and when they send you confirmation of your attendance. You can then log the details on your MyCPD account.
Great, thank you ever so much, Joanne. That was a very, very clear and comprehensive answer. So could we move on, please, to the third question? And this is a question that's been submitted to us. Do I have to complete self-directed CPD, or can I just make up my points total from provider-led CPD? In other words, can you achieve your points total from provider-led CPD, or do you have to do self-directed CPD points? Now, Natalie, I think you have the answer to this question.
Absolutely. So the short answer is no, you don't have to complete any self-directed CPD if you don't want to, and you absolutely can just make up your points total from provider-led CPD. However, we would really encourage you to think about doing some self-directed CPD, partly because it's good to broaden your horizons, but also because we really feel that you should account for and get credit for the learning that you undertake that isn't necessarily offered by GOC registered CPD providers. And it may be that you're already undertaking a lot of that as part of your employment anyway. So the GDPR course that you do for your employer, for example, that would be an example of self-directed CPD that you can claim a point for. So I suppose we really would encourage people to take advantage of that and to log that if they want to. One thing to note, however, is that you can't make up your points total entirely from self-directed CPD. And as I said previously, this is because we can't provide the same level of quality assurance over it as we can over provider-led CPD. And so we're not able to effectively sign off that you are sufficiently safe and learning safely to protect patients if you're doing all CPD that we don't know about. And so you must complete at least 18 of your initial 36 points for most registrants, 54 for specialty prescribing optometrists. You must complete at least 18 of those points from provider-led CPD sources. You can certainly start undertaking self-directed CPD at any point during the cycle, but you must get at least 18 provider-led CPD points to supplement that.
Thank you ever so much, Natalie. And of course, the move to self-directed CPD is one of the fundamental underpinning concepts within the design of the new CPD cycle starting from January. So we do hope that registrants find that of use in relation to their own personal and professional development. So let's move on to question 5, if we may, and that's a question around specialty registration. So the question here is, I am an independent prescriber. Do I still need to complete a peer review with other independent prescribers? Joy, would you like to answer this question, please?
Sorry, I've just got to unmute myself, sorry. Yes, if you are on the specialist register, you will need to complete your peer review with other people on that specialist register. That doesn't stop you from undertaking additional ones with optometrists or DOs, but to actually meet your specialist peer review requirement, it must be done with other people on your register.
Thank you, Joy. That was a very, very clear explanation. And thank you ever so much to whoever submitted this question. So if we could move on to the next question, please. So the next question is, I am anxious about the new peer review requirement. I'm a dispensing optician. As I've never done it before, will there be any additional guidance about what to do? So the new peer review requirement and a new requirement in particular for dispensing opticians. Joanne, are you able to answer this question?
I am indeed. Thank you, Leonie. Well, hopefully your nerves have been put at ease tonight with what you've heard on the webinar so far. But if they haven't, then please don't worry, that is a primary message. Peer review is possibly something that you might already be familiar with as a dispensing optician, as nearly 80% of dispensing opticians have completed a peer review so far in this cycle. We'll be providing some tips as we go along throughout the cycle on what a good peer review might look like. And you'll have the option to attend a peer review from a provider-led peer review if you're not confident of running your own sessions. You might also get some information from your professional body on how to get the most out of a peer review as well.
Thank you ever so much, Joanne. So we're going to move on to our 6th question. How will the GOC make sure that the new CPD system is not exploited? Really good question. What would happen if a registrant logged details of CPD they didn't actually do? So Natalie, what's the response here?
Well, the initial response is that we hope our registrants wouldn't, and certainly we wouldn't expect this to be a common problem that we encounter. As all our registrants will be aware, they're required via the standards of practice to be honest and open in all their dealings, and that would include in their logging and recording CPD as well. But as an extra safeguard, we're introducing a system of registrant record review. So you'll have heard us referring to audit previously. Audit can be a bit of a scary and loaded term. So we're trying to use a registrant record review to hopefully take a little bit of the scariness out of that. Registrants will be, or a certain proportion of registrants will be selected for record review randomly throughout the cycle. I really want to stress, if your record is selected for review, please don't panic. It's not intended to be a punitive exercise in any way, and rather, if you've been logging CPD honestly, as most people will be, then it's absolutely nothing to worry about. And the most that the reviewer will do is look at your record and make suggestions of where you might want to record things slightly differently or clearer, or if there are no instances in which the reviewer can say that, they'll give you a pat on the back for good work. So we're really not expecting it to be a process that registrants are scared of. And the vast majority of registrants won't need to do anything themselves to facilitate that review process. So the reviewer will be allocated your CPD record on their MyCPD system to have a look at. They will have a look at it. If there's any kind of supporting information, for example, that's particularly lacking, they might ask you to upload that, but nothing more than that. So it's not going to be a laborious exercise for you if you're selected. you're not going to have to put a lot of additional work into it. You're not really going to have to put any work into it at all. So I hope that provides some reassurances about that review process. And we're really not expecting registrants to exploit that system in any way. But as a safeguard, review is there if people are willfully trying to mislead us, which we, like I say, we don't expect will happen.
Thank you very much, Natalie. That was a very comprehensive answer there. So we're going to turn now to the penultimate question this evening. And that question is, I am a registrant based in the UK, but I go to a lot of CPD overseas. Do I still need to apply for non-UK CPD to be approved? And Joy, I think you're best placed to answer this question.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, you don't need to apply for approval before undertaking CET based overseas. We would expect you to log that as self-directed CPD, or if your provider was willing, it's still open to them to apply to the GOC to become a provider and just follow the appropriate processes to get registered. So, I mean, there's still two ways. There were overseas organisations that provided CET. They will still be able to do that if they want to apply for CPD.
Thank you very much, Joy. So now turning to the last question this evening. I am currently on maternity leave, so I'm not on the register, but I plan to come back on it probably in 2023. How many points will I need to get? So quite a technical question here, but quite an important one. Joanne, can I ask you to answer this question, please?
Yes, Leonie, I certainly can answer that. I know it's something that a lot of registrants do think about at some stage. So how many points you will need to get depend on how long you're registered for in this particular cycle, and it's prorated accordingly. What you should do is to contact the CPD team for advice when you're planning to restore, and they will be able to give you more specific points requirements at that stage.
Thank you ever so much, Joanne. So that brings us to the end of the question and answer session, and to the end of our webinar this evening. I'd like to thank you all very much indeed for your time and attention, for logging on this evening or for listening to this presentation after the event. We do appreciate your engagement. I'd also really like to thank the panel who's so patiently presented this evening and answered your questions. I'd like to pay particular thanks to Joy, to Natalie and to Joanne for your careful preparation and your presentations this evening. I'd like to thank as well our behind the scenes crew, in particular Vikram, who's handled the technology superbly and demonstrated the slides this evening. I do apologise for those of you who have seen the grey box, which has obscured the title panel. We've been trying to figure out behind the scenes about how to close down that grey box, and I'm afraid we've singularly failed. So I'm hoping that the recording that we'll have on our website will be able to correct that. If not, we'll do better for the next session, which is in February 2022. So for those of you who have popped a question in the question answer function, we'll provide a response to all of these questions and share our answers with you on our website. And this webinar will be available to watch again after tonight, again on our website. And for those of you who missed out to the live webinar or who wish to revisit it. So thank you all very much indeed for engaging in this evening's webinar. May I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, a peaceful and happy New Year, and thank you for your time and attention this evening, and good luck with completing your CET in anticipation of the deadline, which also happens to be New Year's Eve, and your engagement in our new 3-year CPD scheme, which launches in January 2022. So I'll wish you all a very good evening.